If you're new to Ask Reddit cheating drama, make sure to subscribe and like the video. It only takes a few seconds, but it really motivates us to create more crazy cheating stories. Now, let's get into the story. My name is Evelyn Hart. I am 34 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood where the houses all look alike, and the days stretch long between school drop-offs and laundry loads. If someone had asked me 10 years ago who I was, I would have said a lecturer, a lover of poetry, a woman in love with life and language. Now, if someone asked, I'd probably just say a mother, a wife, tired. I left my job teaching literature at a small community college after our second child was born. Caleb, my husband, had just gotten promoted at the logistics company he works for, and the hours were relentless. It made sense at the time. It's just for a little while, I told myself. When things settle, I'll go back. But things never really settle, do they? We've lived in this house for 7 years. White shutters, a patchy lawn Caleb swears he'll fix every spring, and a kitchen I once dreamed of filling with the smell of cinnamon and childhood memories. But most days, it just smells like reheated leftovers and silence. Caleb is a good man, reliable, loyal, hardworking. He comes home late, eats whatever I leave on the stove, asks about the kids, checks his emails, and falls asleep on the couch. I've stopped trying to talk during dinner. It feels like tossing words into a void. Sometimes, I wonder if he even sees me anymore. I wonder if I've become part of the furniture, useful, familiar, but no longer worth noticing. There's a certain kind of loneliness that comes from not being alone. The kind where someone is physically there, but emotionally unreachable. It's worse than solitude. It's a hollowing. That summer, the house across the street went up for sale. I remember watching the movers through my living room window, a baby on my hip, sweat sticking my shirt to my back. I didn't care much until I saw him, the man who would move in. Tall, with a quiet presence. He didn't smile much, wore plain clothes, spent the first week fixing things in the garage with the kind of focus I hadn't seen in a long time. His name was August Thorne. I didn't know it then, but that name would echo in places of me I'd long thought buried. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story isn't really about him. It's about me and how I forgot who I was until I tried to remember through someone else's eyes. It started with a leak. A pipe under the kitchen sink had been dripping for days. I'd meant to ask Caleb to fix it, but the timing was always wrong. He was either on his laptop, half asleep, or already heading out the door. So one morning, standing barefoot in a puddle of cold water, with a crying toddler on one side and a boiling pot on the other, I just lost it. I must have slammed the door harder than I meant to because August, who was trimming the hedge in front of his porch, looked up. He crossed the street, hesitantly at first. I remember how he paused at the foot of our driveway like he wasn't sure if he should be there. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. I stared at him, hair unwashed, sleeves wet, holding a sponge in one hand and a spoon in the other. I must have looked ridiculous. "There's a leak," I muttered. He offered to take a look. I hesitated, just for a second, but then stepped aside. He crouched under the sink, sleeves rolled, tools from his truck in hand, moving with a calmness I had forgotten existed in the world. No complaints, no sighs, just focus. "Easy fix," he said, emerging 20 minutes later with damp hands and a crooked smile. I thanked him. He shrugged it off like it was nothing. But for me, it was the first time in months that someone had noticed I was drowning, even in something as trivial as a leaking pipe. After that, things changed. Slowly, subtly. We started seeing each other more often, passing in driveways, waving while taking out the trash, short conversations over the fence. He always remembered little things I said, how I liked my coffee, which flowers I'd planted near the mailbox. Caleb never asked. One afternoon, I found myself baking banana bread, a recipe I hadn't touched in years. I told myself it was for the kids, but when it was done, I wrapped a few slices in foil and walked across the street. He was in the garage again, working on something mechanical I didn't understand. Grease on his hands, music playing softly in the background, some old jazz tune I couldn't name. When he saw me, he smiled. Not politely, not distractedly, but with real warmth. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing serious, nothing inappropriate. But when I walked back home, I felt something fluttering in my chest. Not guilt. Not yet. Just warmth. And for the first time in a long time, I looked at myself in the mirror before bed, not as a mother, not as a wife, just as a woman. It's strange how easily something innocent can begin to shift, how a wave becomes a hello becomes a conversation, and a conversation becomes the place you go to feel seen. August started leaving his garage door open in the afternoons. I started finding excuses to step outside, to water a plant that didn't need watering, to check the mail twice. Sometimes we'd talk over the fence, and sometimes I'd cross the street, holding a mug in both hands like it gave me permission to stay longer. We never planned anything. There were no secret messages or late-night texts, but somehow we both knew when the moment was right, like gravity. I remember one particular afternoon. The kids were napping, the air was thick with the scent of cut grass, and I found him sitting on his porch with a book in hand. The sun also rises. I smiled without thinking. You read Hemingway? I asked. He looked up. Only when I'm trying to impress someone. I laughed, and it caught me off guard. How easily it came. How real it sounded in my own ears after so long of faking it. That day, we talked for hours about books, about failure, about how he missed his daughter, who now lived with his ex in another city. I told him about the class I used to teach on American Romanticism. I told him how I missed chalk dust and the low hum of voices in a classroom before a lecture began. He listened like no one had in years. There was no flirtation in his eyes, just attention, presence, the kind that makes you feel like you're not invisible anymore. I started carrying his voice with me into the evenings, into the silence of my kitchen, into the moments when Caleb was home but far away, nodding absent-mindedly at my words while scrolling his phone. One night, I dreamt of August. Not of kisses, not of bodies, just us. Sitting at his table, talking, laughing, my head tilted toward the light. I woke up feeling warm, then cold, then hollow. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just lonely, that a little friendship couldn't hurt. But deep down, I already knew, because it wasn't just friendship. It was relief. It was escape. It was the place I went in my mind when the dishes piled up and no one asked how I was doing. And the worst part? I didn't want it to stop. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. The kind of rain that soaks everything instantly, wild and sudden, as if the sky itself couldn't hold it in anymore. I had just come back from the grocery store, arms full, keys slipping from my fingers. By the time I got everything inside, I was drenched. Caleb had left that morning for a 3-day trip. The kids were at school. The house was quiet. Then came the knock. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. August stood on the porch, hair damp, sleeves rolled, holding something in his hands, a small box. You dropped this, he said. It fell out of one of the bags when you were unloading. It was a bottle of cinnamon. I hadn't even noticed it was missing. Thank you, I said, my voice soft. He didn't leave right away. I didn't close the door. Do you want to come in? I asked. I don't know why I said it. Or maybe I do. Maybe I'd been waiting to say it for weeks. He hesitated, just for a breath. Then he stepped inside. The air shifted. Something between us shifted. We didn't touch. Not yet. But he sat at the edge of the kitchen table while I made tea, and we talked. About nothing. About everything. And when I handed him the mug, our fingers brushed, just briefly, barely there, but it sent something electric up my arm. We sat in silence for a while, the rain tapping against the windows like a warning we both pretended not to hear. I miss this, I whispered, not sure if I was talking to him or to the woman I used to be. Just talking, feeling like I exist. He didn't say anything at first. Then, you do exist. More than you know. And it was that line, simple, almost gentle, that undid me. Not the touch, not the look, just the truth in it. Something inside me cracked open, not out of lust, but out of recognition. Like he'd just named a part of me I didn't know I'd buried. I didn't cry, but I wanted to. When he left, I stood at the door for a long time, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading in the rain. It would be easy to say nothing happened that day. No kiss, no affair, but something did happen. Something irreversible. We crossed the line, not with our bodies, but with our hearts. And somehow that felt worse. After that day, everything changed, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in subtle, irreversible ones. I began measuring time by August. When I saw him step outside in the morning, I smiled before I even realized it. When his garage door stayed closed for too long, I felt restless. And when he spoke my name, even casually, it echoed longer than it should have. At home, I became careful with my words, careful not to leave too many gaps in my stories when Caleb asked how my day was, careful not to look too long out the window when August passed by. But Caleb noticed. He didn't say much, not at first, just small comments, tight glances. He started coming home earlier, though still with the same distracted energy. I think he could sense something had shifted, even if he didn't know what. One evening, after dinner, while the kids were upstairs and the dishwasher hummed between us, he looked at me for the first time in what felt like years. "You seem far away lately," he said. I froze. "I'm just tired," I lied. He nodded, but his eyes lingered. It was the first time I felt shame crawl up the back of my neck, not because of anything physical, but because I wanted something else. I craved something I knew I shouldn't. And still, I kept going back. Not always physically, sometimes just in a thought. A sentence August had said, the way he listened, leaned forward when I spoke, the way he remembered small, insignificant things Caleb hadn't noticed in years. There was a moment, a quiet, devastating moment, when I realized I hadn't thought about saving my marriage in weeks. I wasn't fighting for it. I wasn't even mourning it. I was just slipping away. Then, one Saturday, I left my phone on the kitchen counter while showering. Caleb saw a message light up. It was nothing scandalous. Just a simple text from August. "Storm coming, stay dry." But it was enough. When I humped downstairs, Caleb was sitting at the table, phone in hand, staring at the screen like it had just spoken something out loud that none of us wanted to say. "Is there something I should know?" he asked. I couldn't answer, because by then, it was too late. What was there to say? No, I didn't sleep with him, but I gave him the part of me you stopped reaching for. No, I didn't kiss him, but I waited for him to smile at me more than I waited for yours. So I stayed silent. And he knew. He left 3 weeks later, said he needed space, said he'd take the kids on weekends, said we'd figure it out, and just like that, my marriage, the thing I'd built my whole adult life around, cracked open and spilled into the floorboards. August didn't come by after that. Maybe he felt it. Maybe he knew it was over before I did. I didn't reach out. Some part of me hoped he would knock again. But deeper still, a quieter part, the honest part, whispered, "You were never really his to begin with. The house feels different now. Not emptier, just quieter. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, but hollow. A silence that wraps itself around every room, every object, like a layer of dust you can't quite clean off." The kids adjusted faster than I did. They come back on weekends with stories of Caleb's new apartment, his makeshift pancake Sundays, the dog he promises to adopt soon. They don't ask why he left or if he's coming back. Children are resilient, they say. I'm not. Some mornings, I still pour 2 cups of coffee by instinct. I still wake up and check the front yard, wondering if August is out trimming his hedges or fiddling with something in the garage. But his car hasn't been in the driveway for weeks. He left too. No goodbye. No closure. Just absence. Maybe he couldn't handle the wreckage. Maybe he was never meant to stay. Maybe he saw something in me that reminded him of his own ghosts, and he ran. The truth is, I don't blame him. He didn't promise me anything. He didn't ask me to fall. That was me. I went looking for something, for myself, maybe, in someone else's gaze. I wanted to feel alive, desired, remembered, but what I found instead was a reflection I couldn't hold on to. A version of me that only existed in borrowed light. Now at night, I sit at the kitchen table with the lamp on low, fingers tracing the rim of my teacup, wondering how I got here. Not the affair, not the end of the marriage, but the part where I let myself disappear long before anyone else did. That was the real betrayal. Not against Caleb, not even against my children, but against the woman I once was. The one who loved poetry, who believed in quiet joy, who could stand on her own without waiting to be seen. I don't cry much anymore. I've done enough of that, but I do write. Not in journals, not for others, just in the margins of old books, on napkins, receipts. Fragments of myself trying to come back. One day maybe I'll forgive myself. But for now, I live in the echo of the life I almost remembered, the man I never really had, and the version of me I lost along the way. And somehow, that echo is louder than the silence ever was.